got lots of folks still coming in, but we're going to go ahead and kind of get started. We're super excited about this month's webinar. You know, AI, you can't go anywhere or do anything without seeing some nod to it. So we brought in, you know, a widely recognized expert to help us, you know, break all this stuff down and really understand what AI is all about, specifically in the context of IT service management. Before we go any further, I'll answer the 3 most frequently asked questions. Is this being recorded? Yes, it is. It'll be up on our website. Is the deck available? Yes, it is. It is already up on our website. Thank you, Miss Nina. And can we ask questions? And please do go ahead and throw any questions you have into the chat log. That's really going to be my role as we go along, to kind of field questions, and I have a list of questions for Mark myself. So without further ado, let me introduce Mark Hinkle. He's an accomplished executive in high growth technology companies. Mark has, as part of his resume, 2 characteristics that I think we all need to hone in this day and age. And one is a commitment to continuous learning. Things are changing so constantly these days that if you're not a lifelong learner, you're going to be in trouble. And the other thing is the ability to combine technical knowledge with business acumen. I think we all need to understand not how this technology works, but how this technology benefits our organizations. He's recognized for his strategic insights and really helps organizations to navigate the complex challenges and the opportunities that are available with modern tech. So I'm going to go ahead and launch our first poll, let you all start responding to the poll, and I'm going to hand the reins over to Mark. So, hey, Mark.
Well, I am excited to be here. As Donna said, I have spent a lot of time in IT, but also more recently in generative AI. And what we're going to talk about today is how I view AI affecting ITSM programs and how we're going to manage what I call the artificially intelligent enterprise. So let's just start out with who am I and why am I qualified to tell you this stuff? So in the 90s, I started out working in the early internet service provider space. I ran the internal help desk. I spent the next 20 years working with folks from around the industry in systems management, cloud, et cetera. And while I wasn't the smartest person in the room, I got to talk to a lot of smart people who run infrastructure as a vendor and as a developer advocate. So I've collated what I've learned from those people into this presentation today. So I appreciate your time. As Donna said, it's downloadable. And at the end, I have some bonus materials that might be interesting to you. So let's get started.
Well, before you go any further, I'm going to end the poll and just share the fact that we've got a pretty close split between beginner and intermediate. And I always love when we have this type of audience because, and we have 5% advanced because, you know, everybody's going to get a little bit of something, right? Everybody's going to have an opportunity to learn something new. So thank you all, and all yours.
Yep. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to bookend a generative AI systems management overview with how it affects, how I think it's going to affect ITSM. Then I'm going to really go into what does the generative AI infrastructure and management tools landscape look like? And then we'll look at the very end, we'll just look at what I think the future holds, what the challenges are, and what you need to do to be prepared. So this is the first time I've given this talk, so I'm really excited about it. But let's just start with where we are today for ITSM. So this is from the ITSM tools. They did a survey for 2024 of top priorities. And it's probably no surprise to anyone that artificial intelligence tops the list as a priority. Last year, it was number 5. So it's moving up in the ranks. So if they they polled their constituency, the number one, besides value demonstrations, which I think is, should be inherent in anybody's service delivery, the number one thing is AI and machine learning. So let's get into how it's going to change ITSM. So, we broadly have seen ChatGPT and other tools really help desktop productivity. And they're going to probably see, from your standpoint in ITSM, the ability to automate a lot of processes. And we automate a lot of processes today, but we don't do it in a reactive, adaptive, and I'm going to use the word smart, but not that what we do today isn't smart, but what we do today doesn't have any additional ability to make judgments. It's sort of like creating a flow chart. What we have in the future is the ability to take all this data that we're ingesting and make smart decisions and react based on different conditions in our enterprise. So, one of the things it may do is get better, finer categorization of incoming service requests. You will be able to do smart replies to respond to common queries, desktop support, password resets, procedures, things like that. And it will be more human and interactive in its responses rather than a canned answer. And the other thing is we'll probably, based on trends, predict and address issues before they escalate. So say we have a service outage, and rather than sit there and respond to incoming requests, we might even be proactive to say, yes, we understand that there's a network issue in this location, there's a service issue here, et cetera, and actually be proactive. The kinds of things that humans already do, but we can automate those things and let them get to the fixing of the issue rather than the information distribution and response. So the next thing is, and overall, it's probably going to improve our user experience. So you will see a lot of your tools integrated with these things that the term of art right now is Copilot. So they're copilots, and you might use Microsoft Copilot, which is sort of a helper application of your Office suite for Microsoft 365. But you're going to see these copilots that have specific knowledge in all aspects of your IT tooling. So, you're going to see things that will take your preferences and react in such a way. So maybe you're responsible for things around desktop or services or network or, some other aspect of the enterprise, and your information will be, as you do your work, will eventually educate these agents to help you, as sort of like when you're using Gmail and it predictively fills in the blank of what you're going to write. So that's based on, your patterns and recognizing those patterns and predicting the future. And what you see in Gmail is probably one of the earliest implementations of generative AI. And when I use the term generative, I'm talking about the fact that not only does it infer stuff from the data, which is the machine learning side, but it generates unique text based on those learnings. So that's really why this, in the last 2.5 years, has become, or I guess it's only 1.5 since ChatGPT has came out. That was the first demonstration in a broad scale of how these things work. And now we're implementing it into things that we're familiar with. The big thing is this sort of predictive and preventative ITSM. So based on certain things, it may understand that these patterns have a waterfall effect and will trickle down to cause other problems. And based on, it'll be looking at the data coming in from Datadog. It will be looking at your log files. It'll be looking at all sorts of things, and it's going to help ITSM, folks be more, proactive rather than reactive. And because they're going to be proactive, they're going to reduce the downtime. So that was my ITSM, how it's going to affect you broadly. But before we can manage something, we have to, I'm sorry, little click happy. we have to understand and have a sort of ontology or working set of definitions. And when I talk about new technologies, for the longest time, I would have talked about stacks. But I don't think that works in the era of cloud native and microservices. So I think about the way our infrastructure is organized, especially as we add in more and more services that are offsite as webs and not stacks, because a stack implies that it builds on top of each other. So if we think about like web infrastructure, you had a Linux operating system, you had Apache web server, you had a MySQL database, and then you wrote code in PHP or Python or Perl back in the days. That's not what we're going to look at going forward. What I'm going to talk about today is more about webs, and that's just a little bit of a foreshadow, is this is what those webs, or what we used to call stacks, are made up of. Is there's an infrastructure layer, and when we look at how AI is going to change our infrastructure, the biggest thing is that before, our infrastructure was largely tied to the CPU, but because of the way that AI works, it's the advanced math, it uses GPUs, which we all remember from gaming consoles, but the GPUs are optimized to do the same kind of math that AI uses. The linear algebra that they use to draw triangles to create 3D graphics in games is the same kind of math that runs AI. Then we have a data layer behind that. The data layer is the things that you already have in your enterprise. The difference is that now we're going to transform that data in a way that is more easily consumed by AI. So we take, what I call two-dimensional data, so maybe an SQL database, no SQL, and we embed that into vector databases, which are three-dimensional representations of data using vectors. And if you are scarred from college math, as I was, that was probably what we went into in vector math in semester 4. That's the kind of thing we're going to talk about a little bit later. And then the way we prep that data is really creating it, making sure it's clean and usable to be brought into there. So we'll talk a little bit about data labeling. Then there's the machine learning frameworks, and this is these frameworks take the data and analyze it. So this has been around for a lot longer than generative AI, things like TensorFlow and PyTorch. So it's looking at the data and it's learning from that, and that's deep learning. Then we have models, and this is what's in the news all the time. We talk about OpenAI. Their premier model just was released on Monday, called GPT-4.0, which stands for omnimodal, and it means that it can interact with text, video, and audio, and that means multi-modes. Then we have training platforms. Those are the things that take that data, that text, that video, it's audio, etc., and they learn from it. And that's probably the newest and most foundational part of your new AI-generated infrastructure. Then we do the same things. The other layers are very much the deployment, the management, and monitoring application layer, very much like we're used to. It's just a different kind of technology. And then here's the one that is really sort of the tricky one, is when it learns from this model, we want to make sure that it doesn't have bias. And that bias could be, bias against certain groups. It could be bias for a certain kind of data and inference. That's going to be the one that's the hardest for us to monitor and manage. There are tests for that we're going to talk about later. But the key for you to remember is that all of this data comes in, but it is being synthesized by a very, very complex algorithm. And that algorithm is sort of a black box, even to the people that develop it, because it's such complicated math. So if you think about an algebraic equation like a squared plus b squared equals c squared, the Pythagorean theorem. When you think about the algorithm for AI models like GPT-4, that's like a squared plus b squared to the trillionth variable. That's how complex it is. And so being able to trace that and understand how that works is very, very difficult.
Hey, Mark, before you move off that slide, can I ask a question?
Yes, I'll go back to it. Go for it.
So we're getting ready to launch an AI Ops Foundation class. So, and we talk about AI Ops platforms. So do those platforms fit in that management and monitoring layer, or do they span multiple layers?
Both, and this is why. So there's a couple of platforms out there that are very specific to machine learning, because it is a different way to interact, and some of the testing and stuff is unique. I've seen quite a few observability and monitoring management platforms that are gearing towards AI. But the last thing I really want to see is yet another tool to learn. So things like monitoring and observability, I am expecting that our existing observability platforms like Datadog and Honeycomb will have the ability to execute those tests. When we get into things like patching and provisioning, I'm hoping that we can see things like Ansible and Chef and Puppet that can be used to patch those models. But that is sort of cutting edge and yet to be determined. So my answer is, that's why my answer was both.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. So here's how, and I have a couple examples of how, smart people are looking at these, what they're still calling stacks, and is my pet peeve, is that it very much looks like a process flow diagram. This one comes from Andreessen Horowitz, the big venture capitalist. I also, if you have a little bit more gray hair like I do, you can remember that Mark Andreessen started Loud Cloud, which was a early cloud provider, and then turned that into Opsware, which was one of the first sort of modern management platforms. So he looks at it as a sort of process. I also, if you look at Sequoia, they're looking at it as a stack. And so if you look at the bottom slide here, and this is to your question, Donna, is that you see some of these companies that are listed that have monitoring and observability are new names. The one that's sort of unique and addresses sort of these unique management is under experimentation, and that's the company called Weights and Biases. And they are very specific to that. What I'm hoping is if Sequoia puts this out in the next year, that we start seeing some of our traditional tools mapped into them. But for now, I think it's important to understand how it breaks down, and then as the tools evolve, we'll probably see more and more of the tools we already know and love be able to manage generative AI infrastructure. So now we're going to go to my webs. And the reason I'm very, very adamant about webs is that the stack implied that it built in layers. So there was a dependency layer below a dependency layer below a dependency layer. This, because of the microservices, the distribution and infrastructure, the patriation and repatriation of data to and from the cloud, I see that we're more interconnected via APIs and microservices, and the dependencies are not something that have a layer to them the same way that those structures did. This is more of a topographical view than a process view that Andreessen Horowitz put out. So as I go through my talk today, I'm just going to use this web to sort of show you that some of these things have one-to-many relationships, and I think that's why the web metaphor looks better. So this is me going to a simplified framework for AI operations so that we all have the good way to talk about it. I have put these into categories. I am not a industry standards body. I am not, this is mainly my observations as an early adopter of Gen AI. So I think this is going to be helpful because what I tried to do is I took our operations model and I took our infrastructure model and I mapped in the new parts. So if you look at this thing as this circle is the actual center of the web I showed you earlier. And what we have is, you know, one side is the infrastructure, the other side is operations. And I'm going to talk about how we walk through them and how they're loosely coupled to each other. So if you look at things like your data may be consumed by this brain in the center, is what I'm going to call an enterprise LLM. That's the primary place LLM or large language model that you use as a company. But your data may be also used for smaller bespoke parts of that service. And that web sort of connects all those parts together rather than being in a layer. And we're going to just walk down through these to sort of give you a overview of how I think they should be thought about, or at least a good place to have a discussion. So when we talk about the LLM or an AI model, we got to remember that these things are not deterministic. And we as IT people, as much as we can, want to make things deterministic. We want to know that these workflows work in a way that gives us a predictable result because we want reliable infrastructure. Unfortunately, and fortunately, it's a double-edged sword, is AI models are actually probabilities or algorithmically driven, and they're not deterministic. So, you know, they take in all of this data and they make a prediction on that data and they try and make the best prediction they can. And the reason that they hallucinate, which hallucinate you might see in the news or see throughout the industry, means that they give a wrong answer. But that's a bad anthropomorphism of making it seem like there's something wrong when they're actually working in the way that they're designed. They're basically taking all the data they can and making the best prediction possible. And the way that we make them better at predictions is by grounding the model with more information. So you probably have seen something about RAG, which stands for retrieval augmented generation, which means that it's querying data from other sources and using that as part of the query to give it more information so it increases the product probability. So that was a little bit of a sidebar, but I wanted you to understand that that is how the AI model works. And that also makes it a little bit difficult when we want predictable results for how it remediates infrastructure, which is what you'll see in your jobs. And we want to make sure that those models have as much information as possible to make good decisions on our behalf. So, the other thing that you'll see, and these are just the size of AI models. A lot of times you'll see like Llama 70B or ChatGPT 400B or 1T now. That means it's the number of parameters that they've been trained on and also adjusted. So you might see things like we talk about earlier, I showed you there was a company called Weights and Biases. Those weights are almost like giving the model opinions. Like we're going to weight this kind of data higher than other data because we have a higher degree of certainty, or we have a bias that is bias has a negative connotation, but in a lot of times, but we may have a bias to be more conservative, which is probably what you'll see from things that are running or sort of helping us manage critical infrastructure. These parameters, they're growing, you know, exponentially at this point. I don't know that there's a Moore's law for models, but if there was, it would probably be almost like a straight line vertical. It's such a every day it seems that they make bigger and stronger models. So anyhow, let's start with these LLMs. So there's two kinds of LLMs as far as classifications of how we're going to look at it. There's probably going to be a public model. So that's like what ChatGPT uses. That's what Microsoft serves as part of their Azure AI services. That's what Google serves as part of their Gemini. And these models are trained on vast amounts of data, largely coming from the internet and public sources. In the news now, you see a lot of, for example, with Reddit going public, companies like Google licensing their data, because that data helps to inform these models, and they train these models based on these data. Another place that you've probably seen that we've helped Google train on is the reCAPTCHA whenever you authenticate into websites. Um, it's providing a security for us, but for Google, the reason that they have all these crazy pictures is you're actually labeling that data so that they can help inform their vision models. But when you do that, that means that all you have to trust the provider that the data that they have is correct and that they're using clean, unbiased data. And you may not want to put your data into the model because it gets processed by the model. Even though there are privacy controls, there's a little bit of debate of whether or not when you put data into, say, Azure, whether that's at all synthesized into the model. And if you use ChatGPT, you can note in their privacy settings that says something like, allow us to use your data for training. That's a big deal because if you have a I guess if you are bound by some kind of convention, confidentiality of data, you could theoretically be breaking that confidentiality agreement by putting data from your customers, or if you're in the medical field, patients, or legal field, your clients into there. So what we'll probably see is another kind of model, which is the same technology, but either run in a sandbox in the cloud, like Amazon Bedrock or a company called Cohere, or even Google will host these models, and you will train that with your data. So you would download basically a model that is very similar to what you would see from one of the biggest and most popular ones is Meta's Llama. And you would download that and you would either retrain that, which is very expensive, or you would fine tune that, which is taking your data and incrementally updating that model. So think about, it's almost like sending that model to college. All the foundational models will have this sort of high school education. And then if you want to specialize and become a doctor, a legal model, a financial model, you essentially send it to college to get more training, and you train that on data sets that you own or you purchased. All right. So here's sort of the infrastructure around that. So we have our data, which is, our enterprise data we already have stored in data lakes, data warehouses, et cetera. And that data will be either consumed via retrievable augmented generation, but not incorporated into the model, or it will be fine-tuned into the model. And that fine-tuning and training is basically running those machine learning frameworks like PyTorch and TensorFlow to learn and do additional deep learning on that data and applying it to the model. Then we have these things, and these are very, very much the same technology as we're already talking about, but with a level of automation. So there's narrow AI, which are these models that have a very, very finite amount of expertise. So maybe we've trained a model on the best practices for ITIL or CMDBs or all of these things. It may be our resident expert in that kind of thing. That could be one of those models we just talked about, trained on that data, or a smaller model, most likely, because it doesn't have to be big. It doesn't need as many parameters per se. It just needs to have a very deep understanding of a certain thing. And then the other thing that falls in that area is autonomous agents. And these are in the news right now. And that applies the reasoning on top of these models. So you might have, Copilot is the most simple and dumbest agent that you ever use. And when I say dumb, I just mean that it is not going to have the level of reasoning that we would expect for something doing sophisticated tasks. So if we look at even the best models today, what they're good at is inference. They've read everything in the library, so they can understand all this data. And when they incorporate a new experience, they can infer from that data what's going on. Then the thing that they're not great at is reasoning. And if you look at all the data dumped into these models like GPT-4, they're only processing natural language. So they don't have vision, they don't have touch, they don't have smell, they don't have hearing. A 3-year-old or 4-year-old child has consumed more data than even the most advanced large language model, because they have, and we doing by bandwidth, by the amount of data that they're able to collect through all of their senses. So that's where it falls down. And then the third place is model integration and frameworks. And these are the frameworks that allow you to build applications that query these large language models and do something useful. So I'm going to dive down through here a little bit. So we're going to talk about the data as being the new oil. So that's I've given you a very detailed explanation early on, but what you're going to do is you're going to see data coming from these data warehouses and other sources, your log files from Splunk, etc. And you are going to feed them into your large language model so it can understand what's going on in your enterprise. Most likely, you're going to create a dynamic data pipeline that probably looks a lot like ETL does in the old data world, but it's going to make that data usable by the LLM. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. Some that you want to be persistent, you may want it to have be continuously updating and training. Some things you may just want to query against, and that'll be more like your RAG, which will use some of that LLM middleware that I just described, or the integration frameworks, to use that data against your LLMs. And then you want to track and understand where your data comes from. Probably your biggest concern will be data privacy in the long term, though, is that data that you're putting into a public model private, and can you make sure that it does not violate any of those agreements you have with your customers or your partners or clients of any kind. And I probably won't dive into that because that's a whole can of worms, but that's probably one of the top inhibitors of adoption today. The places that I would look if you're interested in that is there's a company called OPEG Systems, opeg.co, and they were founded by a bunch of privacy experts at the University of Berkeley, and they're the ones that helped Intel develop confidential computing, which I think will play a role in the long term. But that's just a bonus nugget. So we talked about these sort of embeddings in vector databases. And just so you understand, these vector embeddings are taking data and creating these these 3D representations of that data. And when you embed this data, you're going to have to decide how to embed it, because you're taking something that's in one format and creating another one. You can make really, really dense vectors, or you can make them a little less complex. And then you'll either store them you probably store them in a vector database. The other thing is, and I didn't touch on, it's becoming more popular, is you'll also be able to use graph databases. And the things that's good about graph databases are that it really does pull, transfer over the data ontology and relationships, and it's a lot easier for the LLM to learn from them. You also hear a lot about tokens, and just so you know how this data goes in there, is these tokens are basically LLMs don't understand language. they understand the probabilities of the next thing that's going to happen. And sometimes they make multiple predictions at once, and that can speed things up. But when you're feeding this data into your LLM, you may be managing by token counts, and these tokens are very, very discrete parts of these word spaces and symbols. And then it sort of, if you look at the character level tokens I showed you there below, it's sort of each one of them is a token, and that's how you're going to be billed. All right. Fine tuning is very much what I've described before, but the thing that you might find is that your fine tuning can happen in multiple ways. You may run training jobs, or you may run training jobs and create patches. And one of the common ways to create patches is called LoRa, L-O-R-A. And I've given you a lot more data than you probably need for this presentation, but I wanted you to understand that when you talk about patching and provisioning, that's how you would probably patch and provision a LLM. Same thing with these narrow AI is you would patch and provision and manage that probably in the same way. The one that I wanted to really dive down in are these autonomous AI agents. That's the place that I would be looking at, especially for ITSM folks, because a lot of your things that are time consuming, you will be offloading in the nearer term. The thing that I want you to remember though is, while a lot of people are scared about how you would potentially be replaced by AI, I don't know many people that are able to complete their job in the time that they would like to anymore and spend more time in deep work. So troubleshooting, improving procedure, things like that is where we'll see the humans spend their time, and AI will probably be spending more time helping us do password resets, troubleshooting problems with end users, things that are very, very time consuming in a one-to-many relationship. That's where you'll see them take over. I call them autonomous AI agents because that was the original term of art, but for most people, they just talk about agents or AI agents. Let's go to sort of stuck. So if you look at this, this is sort of what you'll have a fleet of helpers, and those helpers will be probably task specific, and they will learn from certain things. But for the foreseeable future, if you go back to my analogy that it's good at inference and not good at reasoning, these things will probably be very narrow. So my favorite saying is that my dog is smarter than AI, and that's probably true. The final part on this sort of infrastructure, the AI infrastructure, is these model integration frameworks. So this is the model. This is really the AI middleware that people use to develop apps. And there's really two main players in this space right now, is something called LangChain and something called Llama Index. And they're really the middleware that people will use to write chatbots, take that information, and feed it to LLMs. All right, now we're into the meat. And I know that we're getting towards the end, but this is because you guys know this stuff. All of this stuff sort of maps into CI/CD, and we have all the same buckets. I put it into CI/CD, monitoring, observability, config management, and security, and I call this the AI for ops. And we'll just go through the steps here. So you will have continuous integration and deployment with large language models in a lot of cases. If you run your own one or your own model, or you have continuous updates, or you have narrow AI, you will probably be doing things like you already do with these your other infrastructure. It'll just be in a different format. As I noted earlier, LoRa is probably the state of the art today, and in 2 months, they may come up with a better way to patch and update these models. But you will probably run your CI/CD loop with a build process for large language models. And actually, I keep saying large language models. There's a trend towards small language models, which are more in that narrow AI space. You probably will, when you see things coming out like Google Gemini for your phone and Microsoft Phi for your um, object for tablets, etc. These things are designed to do certain level of tasks locally so that you're not network bound. The other part of CI/CD is really how you deploy and scale those models. It's not clear to me right now what the best practices are, but basically you want to make sure that those models scale out the same way that your CDNs and your webs and your networks do, where they have burstability. And you know that is probably, of all the stuff I'm seeing right now, is scaling out those models other than at the hyperscalers. I haven't seen a lot of information on how they do large language model scaling. I bet you that Google will, after releasing a new AI into search this week, will probably have some very good information on how to do that. Okay. Monitoring and observability. So I spend a lot of time talking. John Willis is the co-author of the DevOps Handbook and one of the folks that has spent a lot of time as a operator in his career and now applying it to AI, is where I think we're going to see the biggest amount of change, is because the types of tests and the way we measure performance is going to change so drastically. We're still going to be doing the same kind of checks, but we're going to need different metrics to do that. And I'm going to touch on them later, and I'm going to give you a whole list. The metrics and the tests are very much what have already been developed by machine learning folks, but now we want to figure out how we map those into our existing tooling. So, we're going to want to know, on that earlier slide, we talked about explainability. Just like we do tracing for things today, we want to be able to have explainability for these models. And hopefully, as we get better at this, we'll better understand how this model is making decisions so that we can change and improve it. So I had mentioned weights and biases, so we can tune those parameters to get better outputs. It's not that much different than, tuning a car to give more horsepower. It's a matter of tweaking and making sure that all those inputs are giving us optimal results. We'll probably see a lot more new technology around debugging and troubleshooting that is very unique compared to what we saw before. Configuration management. This is going to be another one where the tools do the same things as they did before. We will update those parameters, those weights, etc. We'll also want to test the endpoints. We'll run sort of tests and configure them to give us the parameters that perform based on our testing and our observability. I don't know if it'll be Puppet, Chef, Ansible, Terraform like. It probably will be something that is additive to that, but that's where my head is at today for config management. And then security. And this is probably going to be one of the most important things, because we've just increased our attack face for security, exponentially by doing this. And the places that we want to look at from the attack face are really going to be, how do we protect our data coming in? How do we prevent that model from being attacked? So when we talk about training data, some of the things that I've seen recently is that these models are consuming data as prompts, and those prompts are actually not that much different than an injection attack that you'd see against the application server. Some of them are really clever that, for example, now that we have multimodal models that watch or can look at an image and then convert it into text, some of the hackers have actually put their malicious attacks into an image, and the people who've developed the models never thought that they would need a set of guardrails that protects against injection from conversion from image to text, but that's one of the more novel ways that they're attacking these models today. Um, the other thing is that we want to make sure that the output from these models, especially one that you have with proprietary data, doesn't leak data out in the output. So say you have a model that allows you to provide logistics updates to your supply chain. You do not want it to leak out information like maybe base cost or other people's orders in that output. So that's another place. And then above all that, we have regulatory and compliance, and that is a whole nother ball of wax, because right now, as we make laws, we're making those laws for technology that's moving at the speed of a bullet train, while the legislature is, on a parallel train moving at a different speed. So that's probably the place that you're going to see the most uncertainty. The laws that you have to look at right now is California has an AI bill. I don't believe it's passed. The EU just passed their EU AI act recently, and then the U.S. government is trying to figure that out as well. So I'm going to give you, and the only reason I'm not going to talk through any of these things because I don't think it's the best use of our time, but I included in the presentation common performance metrics that machine learning folks use for AI. And this is probably what your metrics are going to look like for managing these models. So some of the things that if you're familiar with Hugging Space, Hugging Space has measures a lot of their models that are, and Hugging Space is, I'm sorry, Hugging Face is the sort of GitHub for large language models. And they use a lot of these scores to show you how capable they are. You'll do the same for yours and probably run them with some kind of platform. So I just put these in here. Download them. You can look, and there's some explanation. I believe they're also in the speaker notes to really dive deep. But that is my overwhelming speed talk of how all your infrastructure will change. But I hope it gave you a good framework. But it just we're bringing in a lot of new infrastructure. I don't think that stacks are a good descriptor. I think having a framework for discussion is good. I tried to provide a framework that's helpful. And I tried to map it to the tools we already use. So hopefully this gives you a decent understanding of how Gen AI is going to affect the infrastructure. And then I'll just, sort of finish here with, what the challenges are. And really, when it comes to anything that we see in our jobs, is technology comes and goes, and we adopt and drop technology all the time. The change management is the hard part. So I think you're probably going to see a couple of things that the number one is going to be integration. How do we integrate with these tools? And now that I've explained to you how training data gets in and stuff, you might see why people have to really consider how that training data goes into AI systems. There is a significant upfront investment, and I lump a lot of things in there. It's not just time, it's upskilling and training. And that's why folks like you show up today and go to webinars, and why I spend a good portion of my time just trying to learn as much as I can, because that is the investment we really are going to have to make, is upskilling. It's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. You'll need these skills going forward. And then there's the resistance that we see from ourselves and our staff. Like, I do not think in the near term you will be replaced by AI, but my fear for you or for myself would be being replaced by someone who knows how to use AI. So I think that's probably the biggest fear. You do see a lot of, in the media and such, about talking about how AI is going to take our jobs, and it's scary, but I can give you examples throughout history of things like the um, automobile, the desktop, the electric motor, all of these things, the smartphone, were followed by um, you know, a period of disruption followed by a huge amount of productivity for the world. So things like that were scary, but because of those things, we've improved our food security, reduced the amount of poverty in the world, and improved quality of life for a lot of people. So that's why I think continuous learning is an important part. All right. That is the bulk of my presentation.
So, so
Um,
Mark, FYI, I actually posted while you were chatting, I started the poll. Our second poll is what's your biggest fear using Gen AI? You were just talking about that. So we're getting those responses now. Can you go back to the previous slide? Because I just want to ask a quick question. Like that's kind of relevant to that slide. And then we have some other questions as well.
yes.
So you're talking, so your little subtitle talks about new technology, same old change management challenge. I just want to validate, you're talking about organizational change management there. Yes, the human
Yes, I'm
aspect of
sorry.
things.
I forgot we have a very
We're very, yeah. But
ITIL,
let's,
ITSM has a very specific thing, and I used change management in the broader organizational change management, not
right.
change
But
management. Very good pickup. I wasn't talking about the procedural, I was talking about the strategic human side of that.
the human part. But
Yeah.
my question really relates to the ITSM aspect of change management and what we call in ITIL now change enablement. You talk about things like using CI/CD, configuration management, information security, all of those practices in order to manage your models. So kind of no different than we would treat a piece of software code. We'd have those practices in play, right? And
Yeah.
and in that context, we would have this overarching change enablement activity that's occurring that's kind of overseeing, the fact that a change is being made, why that change is being made. Do you see that? Like, does change enablement kind of as we know it in IT service management play a role here?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that my takeaway is that what is your processes and your frameworks work because they codify, how we handle things, give you SOPs, etc. Um, I just think that you need to add to your understanding of the new technology. The thing is that we've done this with lots of technologies. Think about cloud native and containerization. That was the same kind of processes with a different subject matter expertise needed. There was a different way to deploy software, but it was still, you had, development, you had to build software, you had to build containers, you had to deploy that. And those things were the same steps and the same processes as far as procedurally, but technically they changed.
Right. Well, and I think, the thing I keep thinking about all of this is, sometimes the DevOps community, for example, really pushes back on change enablement. And that's because they have this view of it as it was, right? Heavyweight, bureaucratic. It's there to get in the way of me getting my job done. But really, modern change enablement is very seamless. Like, really, essentially, it's as long as you're sending your code through a CI/CD pipeline and everything can be tracked along the way, just produce a record to show the fact that a change is being made. And whenever people kind of push back on change enablement, I always ask that question. If something goes wrong, should we not be able to answer the question, what changed? And if your answer is yes, we need to know what changed, then that's where change enablement plays a role. And this is a question. We want to know that here as well. Yes, if the models are being changed and the models are being updated, we want to know what's changed. Yes.
Yes. Yeah. So I had a really interesting discussion yesterday with the CTO of the state of North Carolina, and he is a big advocate for all of the people in his organization to have um, ITIL training, because having the same rigor in how you deploy and manage infrastructure is important for him to deliver service reliably. So uh, that's a really, really important thing to, regardless of the technology, to have that same rigor in your processes to be consistent.
Right. So I'm sharing the results of the poll. Does anything surprise you there?
I am surprised that hallucinations are such a high concern. And the reason I'm surprised by that is because I know that the grounding of models is one of the things that you can do as an enterprise to reduce those hallucinations. But as we use things like ChatGPT, then I sort of makes sense, because anyone that uses sort of the desktop models that doesn't have great grounding in your specific area will know that hallucinations are much more common. I'm also surprised that Gen AI will replace humans in my company. I'm glad that that's the narrative that we are have adopted, because I don't, as I said before, I don't think it's a replacement as much as augmentation. And I'm surprised that data privacy, in a lot of other polls, data privacy is the #1 concern. So, but yeah, I think that that's sort of enlightening to me, is the hallucinations. You should look at, just for those who answered with that, should really investigate how RAG, retrieval augmented generation, and look at Archive, which is ARXIV, has lots of papers there. Do search for hallucinations, and you can see how good grounding of the models can reduce those hallucinations. Like some tests that was 40% accurate in domain specific, but once they're grounded, the accuracy goes up into the high 90s. So that's something we can mitigate today. The data privacy, I don't have as good an answer for, if we want to be able to use it as a web service like we do so many other things. And security is, they're reacting. All the security companies seem to be reacting pretty well, but the attack face is growing every day. It's always cat and mouse with security, but anyhow, that's great. Do we have any questions? I'm happy to stay as long as you would like to answer questions.
We do, and I was just going to make that announcement. Mark is going to stay. We have some questions queued up. I just want to mention to everybody, as always, thank you for attending. If you need to leave us, next month, our webinar is going to be on June 20th. We're going to talk, Mark mentioned the upskilling. We're going to talk about that upskilling aspect in our webinar, AI Proof Your Career. We also have AI Ops launching in August of this year. This is how I've spent the last couple of weeks getting that course ready. So August 26th, we do have a code AI Web. You can get 10% off of that course. So let's answer a couple of questions. So Mark, one of the questions is, in terms of low hanging fruit, where's a good place to start with bringing AI for operations?
That's a great answer. So the low-hanging fruit, I would say that your service desk is probably the easiest place. So taking all your procedures and creating a internal help bot that is informed by AI, and there's actually some really good technology. If you're familiar with acorn.io. They started out doing stuff in deployments, and they're the folks who did Rancher and cloud.com. They have a project where you can actually build your own chatbot that looks like ChatGPT. There's also a ton of other web services that allow you to do that. So, codifying all your data into an LLM so you can chat with your procedures, that's the easiest. That's like a few day project, and you could do that behind the firewall where you're not risking anything. The second place I would say that I would look at is using it, and it's probably going to show up in if you're using ServiceNow in your help desk applications and such to update your tickets and things like that. And then the next thing will be chatting with your data, and that the idea of chatting with your data could be, feeding those logs and such into, or using RAG to actually query those logs and do some root cause analysis. I would say those are the places today. But as I say that, there's probably going to be 5 other companies, including ones that are already your vendors, like Atlassian and such, that are implementing it into your infrastructure. So I think what you're going to see is really, I want to say that this year we expect 30% of enterprise applications, I think that's a Gartner stat, to incorporate generative AI already. But,
we have a couple of they're kind of more comments than questions, but it's a common theme, so I'm going to formulate it into a question. So comments include things like, historically, we're not good at doing data management in IT. Like, this is historical. You have tickets that get resolved with done or fixed or no trouble found, right? Like, so that's not teaching that's not, benefiting a large language model in any way, shape, or form. People don't like to share their knowledge. People hoard their knowledge, they keep it in their brain. So do you have any thoughts about that? Like, how do we make this shift to learning how to teach, how to get humans, and I think knowledge management comes into play here a little bit, right? How to get humans to be willing to teach
well,
AI.
I would start with electric shock therapy, but I'm just kidding, obviously. No, I mean, I think it's a cultural thing. And so, I think that what that sentiment is reflecting is why things like DevOps and DevSecOps have become popular, because there is a contingent of folks that were frustrated by that lack of sharing. But I think it's a cultural thing. There are things that you can use AI to do to prompt that culture. So, it's tough to audit tickets that just say done or fixed manually, but you could be, auto suggest, and part of it could be a time thing and not even a resistance to sharing. So what these agents, and this is a good application for agents, could do is audit the tickets to pull in additional data to make sure that they enrich the tickets that are incomplete. That's probably one of the places where even if the knowledge resides in the human's head and there's no other way to get it out, is going to have to be a cultural shift. Otherwise, you're going to have to you can use AI and agents to, and I don't want to say nag, but really try and make it easier. Let's reduce the friction for how you get that information into your systems, and
Right.
not only do that, but have the ability to distill that information from your systems into your knowledge management systems.
Right. You could teach it, what your expectation for a knowledge article is, and let your text give it rough data, and let AI turn it into that knowledge article that's structured the way you want it to see it.
Sure, and it really would. One thing that it will do a really good job of could be creating postmortems and referencing the right information to make those postmortems good, so that you can more easily learn.
Right. I think this is the last question, but while you're answering, I'm going to just scroll real quick and make sure. For the layman, what impact do you think there will be of Google's embedding AI into search?
So I think that, so I've been playing with it this week, and I will tell you that their first implementation is not been the greatest, but I think in the long term, it's going to make knowledge transfer from the web to us much easier. I think it's going to probably make it, it's going to really be one of the most disruptive things on the e-commerce world where they do search engine optimization. But I will tell you one thing that was really helpful was for me to, I was testing it out. And what I like about it is when you're looking for procedural recommendations, it does a really good job of distilling that down. So when I work on my vehicles, I have a newer Ford Bronco, and I want to find out that procedure, that came out very, very good. I think it's going to be weird because Google, the bulk of Google's revenue comes from advertising, and how that advertising affects the way we get search results has been interesting. For now, the experience I like around search is from a company called Perplexity, and Perplexity takes the search index and cites all the sources for the data, which helps with explainability. And I like that experience, but I'm not sure that it makes the ads around them as rich. So you have the, sort of tension between Google wanting to remain super profitable and the search actually being as useful as possible. So,
Right.
but anyhow, so that's how I see that. Uh,
Um, that's interesting because I was doing something on Chat GPT and I asked it threw out some statistic and I said, give me the attribution on that. And it couldn't, like, and I was like, okay, this is like, here's where you start to mistrust. But again, a comment, but I'm going to turn it into a question and then we'll wrap. The Sorry, somebody just posted something and I scrolled down from it. Okay. The vast majority of help bots in my experience have been horrible. They key on certain words and don't actually understand the question posed like a human would. So again, you want to
so
comment on that?
I think that it really, and I'd have to see what they want. I think it's just the quality of the back end model. And so if you look 2 months ago, you may be using a model they may be using a back end that is not nearly as good, but my experience has been, and this is the other part that's probably why if you were trying to use it for very technical, then that's why I really wanted to dive into like narrow AI, is it's a training issue. It's not really a capability of that. Is if it was trained on the right data or fine-tuned on the right data, you would probably have a really, really good response. But remember, I was telling you that they're probability agents. So if that model is not adequately grounded on the right corpus of information, it probably wouldn't do that good a job. I would imagine in the long term, you'll see stuff in our industry that like there'll be domain specific bots like ServiceNow and Datadog and Splunk or slash Cisco now. I think that they will probably provide, ChatGPT kind of functionality for systems management professionals, developers, networking professionals, ITSM folks in general.
Yeah, I saw a little article about how a lot of these AI ops platforms are pretty complex. And so there's a relatively steep learning curve. And the example, the response was being able to apply a Chat GPT like functionality to help people learn how to use technology.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
Like I would imagine a company like Spiceworks, who was very much, and I don't even know if they're still around, but they were very much a community of, technical folks, are going to be able to launch a good thing. Quora, that's why Quora is being sought after, and they have their own LLM called Poe, and that's why Stack Overflow is launching their own one, because they have the training data to make those things good.
Well, Mark, thank you so much for joining us. We appreciate it. Welcome to the ITSM Academy family, right? Once you've done a webinar for us or taught a class for us, you're part of the family. So welcome. We very much appreciate your time. Thanks to everybody who stuck around. We have posted some links for you. Mark has a great podcast in that, or newsletter, excuse me. And the link for that is in your chat. And again, next month, we hope you'll join us for AI Ops Foundation. We've posted a 10% promo code for that. So thank you all again. Have a great day, everybody.
I'm so sorry to interrupt. There is one more good question, and they've all been great questions, but
Sure.
if you wouldn't mind just picking up Daniel's question before we drop off.
All right. Okay. So why would you invest into your internal capabilities in developing your own voice, video, and audio translating AI?
You probably, and this is to my point around narrow AI. So that's multimodal. I am going to say that you probably will consume a audio, and unless you're doing something really specific, like let's think about chip design, where video and image is really important. For a lot of applications, it's just going to be text-based, but I would say in manufacturing, where you're going to look for defects and things like that, that's where it makes sense. But if I was, let's just say, an IT hyperscaler or hosting provider or some kind of service provider, it'll probably mainly be text. The point is that however the information is being disseminated in general is probably where you will start today. In the longer term, it'll probably be what they're calling omnimodal now. But in the short term, the places that would do audio or video or image would have to have some compelling business reason to do that. But that's a really good question, Daniel.
All right. I think that's it.
Great.
All right. Thank you all. Thank you again, everybody. Thank you, Mark, very much.
All right. Cheers, everyone.
Have a great day.